In early January of 2015, the executives of a multi-billion-dollar luxury empire made a decision that terrified their investors. They had exactly 5 days before one of the most important global runway shows of the year. The sets were built. The models were cast. The garments were perfectly tailored and ready to be revealed to the world's most vicious critics. Then they threw it all in the trash. They sent their light designer packing. They scrapped the entire upcoming collection. And they handed the creative control of a $3 billion fashion house to a complete unknown. A man who had been quietly working in their accessories department for over a decade. It was corporate suicide. If this hastily assembled, 5-day collection failed, it would trigger a catastrophic collapse in consumer confidence. The brand was already bleeding revenue. The media was already writing their obituary. They had bet their entire global identity on a frantic 11th-hour gamble. But they didn't just survive the week. They conquered the decade. The mechanism behind their resurrection wasn't just a change in fabric or silhouette. It was a psychological masterclass in weaponized aesthetics. It is a framework of calculated visual chaos that completely rewired the global economics of the luxury market. We are going to reveal exactly what that framework is and how you can apply it to your own market positioning a little later in this breakdown. First, we need to examine the stagnation. We need to look at the rigid, outdated, and suffocating corporate culture that pushed this iconic Italian brand to the absolute brink of irrelevance. So how did Gucci go from a declining, creatively bankrupt leather goods company to engineering a radical, maximalist makeover that doubled its revenue to nearly $10 billion in just 4 years? That is the exact question we are answering today. To understand the sheer genius of this turnaround, you must first understand the trap of historical success. Let's go back to the late 1990s. Gucci was the hottest brand on the planet. This was the era of Tom Ford. Ford had taken a dusty, aristocratic luggage company and injected it with pure, unadulterated sex appeal. He designed sleek, provocative, hyper-glamorous clothing. He used aggressive, controversial marketing. He transformed Gucci into the ultimate symbol of wealth and exclusivity. It was a brilliant strategy for the time. It saved the company from bankruptcy in the 90s. But success creates a dangerous blueprint. When Tom Ford left the company in 2004, the executives were terrified to change the winning formula. They handed the reins to a designer named Frida Giannini. Her mandate was simple: keep the machine running. Do not upset the apple cart. For nearly a decade, Giannini executed a watered-down version of the Tom Ford aesthetic. The clothes were polished. They were sleek. They were safe. But culture does not stand still. The global financial crisis of 2008 fundamentally altered consumer psychology. The aggressive, highly polished, hypersexualized wealth of the early 2000s suddenly felt deeply out of touch. It felt arrogant. A new generation of consumers was entering the market. Millennials. This new demographic did not care about the rigid, dictatorial rules of traditional luxury. They cared about authenticity. They cared about ironies. They were raised on the internet, fluent in the chaotic visual language of Tumblr and early Instagram. Gucci was completely blind to this shift. They continued to push their polished, exclusive aesthetic. They relied heavily on their legacy products, the bamboo handle bags, the interlocking G-belts. They were functioning as a heritage museum, not a modern fashion house. The market response was brutal. By 2014, the stagnation had turned into a financial crisis. Gucci's revenue began to shrink. In the third quarter of 2014, sales fell by nearly 2%. In the cutthroat world of luxury conglomerates, a shrinking flagship brand is an absolute disaster. Gucci was the crown jewel of the Kering Group, the massive French luxury holding company. The executives in Paris looked at the balance sheets and realized that the brand was dying of boredom. The sleek, sexy aesthetic wasn't just tired. It was invisible. This is the dip in the corporate J-curve. This is the moment of maximum friction. In late 2014, Kering made a ruthless, decisive move. They fired the CEO, Patrizio Di Marco. Shortly after, they fired the creative director, Frida Giannini. The power vacuum was absolute. To fill the CEO position, Kering brought in Marco Bizzarri. Bizzarri was a brilliant operational mind who had successfully turned around other brands within the portfolio, like Bottega Veneta. But Bizzarri was a business executive. He needed a creative visionary to actually design the clothes. The traditional fashion playbook dictated that Bizzarri should hire a massive, established star, a famous designer from a rival house to generate immediate press and investor confidence. Bizzarri ignored the playbook. Shortly after taking the job, he scheduled a casual coffee meeting with a man named Alessandro Michele. Michele was not a celebrity. He was a behind-the-scenes workhorse. He had been at Gucci for 12 years, quietly designing handbags and jewelry. He was essentially a mid-level manager in the creative department. Bizzarri intended the meeting to be a standard debriefing. He wanted to understand the internal culture of the design team before he brought in a new superstar. They met at Michele's apartment in Rome. They drank coffee. They talked. And Bizzarri realized something profound. Michele possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of the brand's history, but he had absolutely zero respect for its current direction. Michele thought the sleek, sexy aesthetic was dead. He believed fashion should be eccentric, emotional, and intensely personal. He didn't want to design clothes for the red carpet. He wanted to design clothes for the street, for the outcasts, for the intellectuals. Bizzarri saw the spark. He saw the exact antidote to Gucci's suffocating boredom. He asked Michele a terrifying question. Could you design the upcoming menswear show? There was a massive problem. The menswear show was in 5 days. Giannini had already designed a complete collection before she was fired. It was safe, boring, and ready to go. Michele said yes. What happened next is one of the most legendary sprints in the history of retail operations. They threw out the entire existing collection. Michele and his panicked design team worked around the clock for 5 days straight. They ripped apart garments. They sourced new fabrics. They fundamentally altered the casting, bringing in models who looked like androgynous musicians rather than chiseled athletes. When the lights went up on the Fall-Winter 2015 menswear show, the global fashion press held its breath. The first model walked out. He was wearing a red silk pussybow blouse, a garment traditionally reserved for conservative women. He wore shrunken trousers. His hair was long and messy. He wore thick, vintage-inspired glasses. It was a shock to the system. It was the complete, violent antithesis of the Tom Ford era. It wasn't sleek. It wasn't polished. It wasn't overtly sexual. It was weird. It was gender fluid. It was geek chic. The fashion critics were deeply divided. Some called it brilliant. Others called it a disaster. But one thing was absolutely undeniable. Nobody was bored. Gucci had captured the attention of the world. Shortly after the show, Marco Bizzarri officially named Alessandro Michele the sole creative director of Gucci. The 5-day sprint was over. The maximalist era had officially begun. But a controversial runway show does not guarantee billions of dollars in revenue. To truly turn the company around, Bizzarri and Michele had to weaponize this new aesthetic across a massive global supply chain. They introduced a philosophy that completely shattered the rules of modern luxury. Maximalism. For a decade, the dominant trend in fashion had been minimalism. Clean lines, subdued colors, quiet luxury. Brands like Celine and Prada championed a restrained, highly disciplined look. Michele went in the exact opposite direction. More is more. He layered prints on top of prints. He mixed Renaissance art references with 1970s disco styling. He plastered garments with intricate embroidery of snakes, tigers, and blooming flowers. He took the iconic, interlocking G logo, which the brand had been trying to subtly hide, and blew it up to massive proportions. He created bizarre, highly specific hero products, like the Princeton loafer, a classic leather shoe completely lined with wild kangaroo fur. It looked chaotic, but it was highly calculated. This brings us to the core insight. The absolute secret behind the mechanics of the Gucci turnaround. This brings us to the aha moment. Gucci didn't just change the way their clothes looked. They changed the economic function of the clothing itself. In a minimalist luxury brand, the consumer journey is highly limited. If you buy a perfect, understated black trench coat, you do not need to buy another one. The aesthetic demands restraint. You buy one signature piece and you are done. The brand dictates the look and you conform to it. Michele inverted this dynamic. By creating a chaotic, maximalist universe, he wasn't dictating a uniform. He was providing a vocabulary. Gucci stopped selling looks and started selling components. A consumer could buy a floral silk bomber jacket, a pair of tiger-embroidered jeans, a massive logo belt, and chunky, jewel-encrusted sneakers. None of it matched. And that was exactly the point. The consumer was invited to mix and match these wildly disparate elements to create their own highly personalized, eccentric identity. Gucci transformed from an exclusive club into an open-source platform for self-expression. This had a devastatingly effective impact on their bottom line. It drastically increased the units per transaction. Consumers weren't just buying one statement piece. They were buying multiple pieces to layer together. Furthermore, this extreme visual density was perfectly engineered for the algorithmic age. Minimalism dies on Instagram. A beautifully cut black suit looks like a blank square on a smartphone screen. But a bright green jacket covered in embroidered snakes and glittering crystals. That stops the scroll. Gucci's maximalism was the world's most effective clickbait. Michele understood that in the modern digital economy, visual attention is the ultimate currency. He designed clothes specifically to be photographed, shared, and memed. The marketing department, empowered by Bizzarri, leaned into this digital dominance. They launched campaigns like actively inviting digital artists and meme creators to remix Gucci imagery. They completely abandoned the arrogant, distant posture of traditional luxury brands. They engaged directly with internet culture. They also recognized the massive purchasing power of the streetwear market. Traditional luxury brands despised streetwear. They viewed it as cheap and unrefined. Gucci embraced it. They partnered with Dapper Dan, the legendary Harlem tailor who had famously bootlegged Gucci logos in the 1980s. Instead of suing him, they funded a massive, collaborative atelier with him. They bridged the gap between high-fashion exclusivity and hip-hop authenticity. The results were astronomical. By 2018, Millennials and Generation Z accounted for a staggering 62% of Gucci's total sales. They had successfully captured the most elusive, lucrative demographic on the planet. Between 2015 and 2019, Gucci's revenue completely exploded, rising from roughly 3.9 billion euros to nearly 9.6 billion euros. They became the fastest-growing luxury brand in the world. They single-handedly drove the massive financial success of the entire Kering conglomerate. However, achieving this level of explosive, global growth requires an almost impossible level of internal operational alignment. When Marco Bizzarri and Alessandro Michele decided to completely scrap a global collection in 5 days, they didn't just need a good sketch. They needed the immediate, flawless coordination of hundreds of people. The design team in Rome had to instantly communicate radical new changes to the manufacturing facilities in Florence. The marketing team in Paris had to instantly pivot their global messaging. The logistics teams had to source completely different raw materials overnight. When you are executing a massive strategic pivot or trying to scale a complex new product line, operational friction will destroy your momentum. You cannot rebuild an empire if your creative visionaries are disconnected from your supply chain operators. You cannot move fast if your teams are stuck in endless email chains and siloed spreadsheets. That is exactly why modern, high-velocity organizations rely on Miro. Miro is the ultimate visual workspace designed specifically for deeply collaborative, cross-functional teams. Instead of letting your creative vision get lost in translation, Miro provides a single, infinite canvas where your entire organization can align in real time. If you want to apply the Gucci framework of rapid, chaotic iteration to your own business, you need a system that captures complexity without stifling creativity. Miro allows your design teams to build massive visual mood boards, while simultaneously allowing your project managers to map out the exact supply chain logistics required to execute that vision. It bridges the dangerous gap between the creative brain and the operational engine. It ensures that when leadership decides to pivot, the entire global organization pivots flawlessly on the exact same page. You can start aligning your creative and operational teams right now by clicking the link in the description to try Miro for free. When you strip away the fur-lined loafers, the runway theatrics, and the celebrity endorsements, the Gucci turnaround reveals a profound, undeniable truth about the modern consumer economy. Conformity is dead. For a century, luxury brands built empires by telling consumers exactly what to wear to signal their status. They sold conformity wrapped in an expensive logo. Gucci recognized that in the hyper-connected, digital age, the ultimate luxury is not conformity. It is curated individuality. By taking a massive, terrifying risk, by abandoning their safe legacy and embracing the chaotic, the weird, and the maximalist, they didn't just change their clothes. They changed the paradigm. They gave a generation the highly profitable vocabulary to express exactly who they are. They bet on chaos and they won the decade. If you learned something new, hit the like button and subscribe for more strategy breakdowns. And let us know in the comments, what company's strategy should we unlock next?